So, over the past few weeks, you know how I've been in my ethics course and we've discussed a lot of different topics throughout this time. And one of the ones I found most interesting was our euthanasia and physicians assisted suicide topic. One of the articles I chose to take a look at further with you and discuss was Cusi's article, Critical Notice: Why Killing is Not Always Worse and Sometimes Better Than Letting Die. Within Cusi's article, they took the utilitarianism view on euthanasia and argues Nesbitt's difference theory, which basically the difference theory is that killing is wrong, but passively letting someone die is not. Basically, we don't have to save people,
Right.
but you just don't kill a person. Now, what Cusi argues with this is that there is no moral difference between passive and active euthanasia. They use the example of a truck driver and the co-truck driver who got into a deadly accident. The co-truck driver was able to walk away free, but the truck driver was stuck and dying a very painful death. Now, the truck driver asked was for the co-driver to kill them. And once they did that, they were convicted of manslaughter, but the truck driver believed that it was morally right because they were relieving the pain of the truck driver, and it was their wishes to do so. Cusi argues that this example would undermine the difference theory because there are certain situations where active euthanasia is better than passive euthanasia, and it's not the actual act of the killing that defines whether it is morally right or incorrect, but relies on the circumstances. And when the decision is voluntary and in the best interest, that active euthanasia would be a better route than a passive route.
That's an interesting... I wasn't agreeing until you got to the second part of your explanation. I was going to say that I think, in the truck driver situation, actually the easier choice is to take the gun and to alleviate the pain, because it would be harder to stay and watch a person and comfort them and be with them and connect to them and be with them in death. You would share their death with them. I'm not really sure how I feel about it. I think that death is an experience. Life is about experiences, and death is your final experience in death. And, watching both your grandma and grandpa die, and it was not without suffering, but they accepted it and they experienced it. And I feel they both had good deaths, not without pain. Now,
But
granted, I know that, certain illnesses, it's excruciating pain and things like that. But, working in the nursing home, I watched people die, I helped people die, not euthanasia, but go through the process, the experience of death. And I think
acceptance.
I think it really, a lot of it does, I'm not discounting the pain part of it, aspect of it, but I think a lot of it depends on your own belief system and your own state of mind as far as what you believe, and your family and how they help you work through it. And like in the truck driver situation, I mean, me personally, I don't think I could pull the trigger on anyone for any reason. I don't know that I could do it. Like if a loved one asked me, I mean, I can't say one way or another right now because I've never
been in this situation.
I've never been in that situation.
And it's also like,
but
we've talked about this before.
Yeah.
That it's a kind of an outlier situation where
right. That's not
going.
Normally, you're thinking of terminal situations. And there are so many, I don't think pain is the only factor that people consider when they think about euthanasia, because a lot of times there's a guilt factor. They don't want to put their families through. It could be on both sides, Sometimes the patient himself or herself doesn't want to put the family through, the long-term, I mean, just the suffering, because the family suffers as well, watching a loved one suffer. Or, a loved one may agree to euthanasia because of guilt that they feel they don't want their loved one to suffer, and I was going to argue, or when you said, when you're talking about euthanasia, I was thinking about some people sometimes say, well, we euthanize our pets, what we should do the same for people, but I don't really think you can compare the two, because animals can't reason and all they feel is the pain.
Right.
There are no feelings there are no connections there's no understanding or acceptance, or there's none of that.
Right.
I was thinking the other day about, you remember your friend Lee when you went to preschool, and his grandfather died of cancer. I don't remember what kind of cancer it was, but I know it was very, very, it was very painful. He lost, and people talk about, I want to die with dignity. And it depends on what you consider dignity. I think being a human being and being treated as a human being is dignity.
Right.
At the end, he couldn't go to the bathroom by himself. And I think Lee at the time was, I don't know if you remember, was he what, 10, between 8, 9, 10, not older than 10 years old, had to help this man go to the bathroom in the middle of the night, help his grandmother get him on and off the toilet. He watched all of this. It definitely shaped him as a person. But I remember before the end, and I know he was already in severe pain at this time, but I remember seeing him one day after church, and I saw him, I hadn't seen him in a long time, and I went over to give him a hug, and he hugged me, and the intensity of that hug, I felt, it just, I was blown away. I had the realization that this man is trying to feel
As
physically, emotionally, as much human contact, as much living, as much of the human experience as he could, and I don't think his death was easy, but again, I think, depending on how you look at it, it was a good death. Another situation that I was thinking of was talking to Grandma's neurologist one time. We were talking about, her death, or we talked about what was coming, what would be coming down the line, because, we had talked before, basically I watched her die for 5 years every day, day by day, slowly, little pieces of her. And she suffered too, but the interesting thing was, he brought up, his brother had just died, and he was a physician, and he said, he was very candid, and I always appreciated him for that. But he said, I've never seen a good death as a physician.
Right.
We always, when people die, it's always traumatic. It's in the OR, or something is happening. But he was able to spend time with his brother, who also had cancer, and he said, and he actually had suffered greatly physically, great pain, but he, part of it, he had great faith, and he had accepted death. He knew it was coming. He was ready for it. And he had, these conversations with him about death. Are you afraid? Are you ready? And his brother was really ready, and he accepted the pain. He accepted all that came with the disease and the illness in preparing for his death. And he had his loved ones around him, and and I was just, I appreciated the doctor telling me this. I think he was preparing me, or trying to help me in what was to come. And, and he said, and everything, and his brother ended up, in the end, he ended up going very peacefully. And I'm not saying that he didn't suffer, but it was a good death. Now, can everybody experience that has a terminal illness or something that's painful? I don't know, because I think it depends on
the circumstance.
Well, and I think it depends on your thinking and what maybe even pain tolerance. I have very low pain tolerance. I'd like to think that I would be that person that accepts death and takes it gracefully in a dignified way, but I don't know. I'm pretty much a baby when it comes to pain, some certain types of pain, and so I might be asking you to help me, you know? I
But
don't
with
know.
that, basically, though, the circumstances, while you don't agree with QC to where that active euthanasia, I mean, the very small
Well, the one,
window where,
right,
like, with the truck driver situation, they're dying right then and there.
right, and you have
It's
no access to pain,
exactly.
comfort care or hospice care or anything
So, in
like that.
that aspect of
Yeah,
it, while that's not something that you could see yourself doing,
right.
that's a very small situation where you could potentially agree on. But on the overall concept of euthanasia, when it comes down to,
I think it's part of the human experience. Dying is part of the human experience, and just like we artificially lengthen life,
mm-hmm,
I don't know that we should artificially shorten
shorten
life
life.
is either. I do think we should give as much comfort as possible, going through, the hospice care system, which was, I've just never met, I mean, and I don't know that all hospice facilities, or, I mean, they came to us, but, companies, whatever you want to call them,
Mm-hmm.
are as compassionate as the ones that we dealt with. But I don't think I've ever met people that were so kind and considerate and compassionate and empathetic,
Mm-hmm.
you know. Um,
So you, in a sense, you're kind of, you agree that it's circumstantial, but you feel that with each circumstance, though, it's more so that the passive.
I think it's circumstantial because each situation is different. But morally, I mean, okay. So as far as from the perspective, should there be laws, or I don't know that I would. I don't know that I would say no. You cannot
Mm-hmm.
have assisted suicide because I believe it's morally wrong. But I do believe that morally it's not. It's not part. I think we need to live our human lives
Right.
as intended. Suffering is part of our existence, and it's an experience. What was it you said? The four things. Was it Kusi that said
No,
that
this
that
was
was the other, or was it
this
a
was
different one?
different, but that was like with when we were talking about abortion and
Oh,
Marquise's.
oh, that's right. But
That
you were
was
saying there were
the four experience.
four experiences.
Well, not experience. The four characteristics
Right, and
of.
experience was one of
Mm-hmm.
them. And I think death is an experience. It's an experience of life for the people that are dying. And then, I mean, it's your natural end. Um, I've always struggled over the whole concept of it because I don't want people to suffer. Yet I really do believe that there's a natural order to things,
Mm-hmm.
and I feel like the more we get away from the natural order of things, the more we lose our humanity, if that makes sense. I know
Mm-hmm.
it sounds like it's actually contradictory, like
But
allowing someone that, saying that allowing someone to suffer in death is, part of our humanity, where some people might say, no, you shouldn't let somebody suffer. But I think we need to be with them. We have to have that interconnectedness.
mm-hmm.
Um, and then again, you know, I'm not that person suffering, so maybe I'm not the one to decide. Maybe we don't get to decide, maybe it's up to that person.